Today I'm celebrating India because I actually have two friends coming, both of whom have spent a lot of time in India. And so I'm making a curry. And I love making curries because it's exactly like painting. It's, you know, when I mix my paints, it's a little of this and it's a little of that. And when you make a curry, you add a little turmeric and you add a little cumin and you add a little coconut milk. And that's what's fun. And today I want to talk about compassion. My guests today are Dr. Robert Thurman, who is the president of Tibet House, and the Jaisong Kappa professor of Indo-Tibetan Studies at Columbia University. He's one of the most intelligent men alive. He speaks about 15 languages, including Sanskrit. He's written 12 books about Buddhism, including Essential Buddhism, Infinite Life, The Jewel Tree of Tibet, Inner Revolution, unbelievable books. And he's also the father of 5 children and 5 grandchildren. And he's perhaps one of the most sought after teachers and lecturers in the world today. And he's a great teacher of compassion. He was the first Western monk that the Dalai Lama ever ordained. And subsequently, he taught the Dalai Lama, at the Dalai Lama's request, his whole Harvard education, so that the Dalai Lama ended up knowing Western science and philosophy, and Bob ended up being a Tibetan monk. Now, the other person that I'm going to have today is Dr. Lawrence Brilliant. Larry Brilliant managed the smallpox campaign in India in the 70s. It eradicated smallpox. It was for the World Health Organization. After that, he came back to America and he started Seva Foundation. And the Seva Foundation is an organization that has given over 2 million operations to people who have cataracts. He has saved the sight of more people than any other entity in the world, in the indigenous worlds of Asia and South America. Dr. Brilliant is a man of many parts because he's also been the CEO of 10 different companies. And he went to India in the 60s. He belonged to the Hog Farm. Now, the Hog Farm was the social consciousness of the countercultural movement. And he was a rainbow hippie. He went with 40 people in 2 buses, and they traveled across Asia for 2 years studying with spiritual teachers. And his teacher was Neem Kairoli Baba, who is a great, now dead, Hindu saint. Oh, I almost forgot the coconut milk. It's so divine to have coconut milk in the curry. There we are. You can buy coconut milk. Luckily, I have been squeezing coconuts. I am looking forward to lunch today because these are 2 wise and knowledgeable men who are also very compassionate. So I'm going to learn something. Here, have some chutney.
Oh, thank you.
And you have some
chutney.
coconut.
How wonderful.
There's everything in this. I mean, there's raisins, there are cashews,
Oh,
there are
that's
what's
fantastic.
not.
I'm going to have straight chutney.
We're having your basic thing. And
Take
of
my
course,
chutney
Larry's
straight.
just back from India, so he's done nothing but eat
I've
Indian
never had
for
food
days
like
and
this
days
before
and
in
days.
my life.
No.
This is bobo curry.
Wonderful.
So we have to do like Indian blessing or something because
Well,
I'm
it's
so happy to have you here.
Oh, thank you, Lord. It's really
And
nice to
I
be
feel
here.
so blessed to have the most wonderful friends and the most compassionate friends in the entire wide world. And therefore, it's hugely fun to cook lunch because then I get to hang out. That's the whole point of these lunches, is hanging out. It is. But anyway, the thing that I wanted to sort of ask you about was that, you know, what's interesting about you, you know, since you are both friends and I know what you've done, you both really young in your 20s gave up the whole idea of Western success and you both went off to India. And I'm just curious what you found when you went there.
You know, I think the truth is I was too young and stupid to know what I was looking for. I was certainly too young and too stupid to know that I'd found it when I found it.
Oh, really?
And it wasn't, you know.
What year did you go, Larry? When was it?
71.
71.
What year did you go?
61.
But you did find your whole sort of life's calling. And that to me is what's so fascinating about Maharaji.
I was a doctor. I was in a internship in San Francisco. And I developed cancer of the parathyroid gland. And I was operated on, I was told. So I had to stop my gravy train. I couldn't go from being a medical student to being an intern to being a resident. I had to take some time off for healing from the surgery. Ironically, I was told, whatever you do, just don't go anyplace hot. You get dehydrated, you know. And so a bunch of Native Americans landed, took over Alcatraz Island here.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the women wanted to have a baby on Alcatraz because it was Indian liberated, Indian held land. It was a very mystical connection to the land. And there was no water, there was no electricity, and no doctors.
Oh.
Sounded perfect. So I flew out there, Coast Guard took me out there, and I stayed on the island and I helped this woman deliver the baby. I took John's hand as the baby was crowning so that the first hand that touched the baby would be an Indian hand. And then I got off the island, and I landed on the shore of San Francisco, and there were 16 zillion television cameras in my face saying, you're an expert on Indian affairs, tell us what the Indians really want. It's like, what do women really want? You're going to ask a man? You know, I hadn't even seen an Indian until 3 weeks earlier, and then all of a sudden I was an expert. And I was on a bunch of TV shows being an expert on Indian affairs, knowing nothing. And I got an invitation to play a role, a very small, unimportant bit role in a Warner Brothers movie, which was perhaps the worst movie ever made in human history, called The Medicine Ball Caravan. I played a young doctor, and that movie is what introduced me to the Hog Farm and the Grateful Dead and all these rock bands that were in the movie, and I sort of became their doctor.
And that's how you got to India.
And that caravan in that movie took us all the way to India. So I was deep into being a rock doc and didn't know what spiritual anything was.
Now, before we go to the next element, I want to hear how you got to India.
Well, I decided that India had some sort of science of the mind, you know, some better philosophy courses, better psychology courses.
Yes.
So I took off to India with a friend of mine from college, from Harvard. I took an infinite leave of absence in my senior year instead of an indefinite one. and left for India, thinking that there would be some yoga there or some way of learning to manage my own inner life, you know, that was what Harvard totally lacked, you know. And when I got there, and I met a lot of people on the way, I sold my motorcycle that I bought in London, I sold it in Greece. And then I walked into Asia and hitchhiked and so on, met some Sufis and sheikhs and people like that, some Swamis when I got to India. And then one day I met the Tibetans. And the Tibetans brought the sort of treasury from old ancient India, I believe, you know, when Buddhists and Hindus were together in India in the old days. And that just was coming home to me. It was like just totally fantastic. But I went there looking for sort of yoga, some kind of yoga about my emotions and my mind and my intellect, you know. Wasn't really religious. I wasn't looking to belong to anything or do anything. So in a way, I wasn't seeking a guru or anything like that. I was just looking for courses and classes and new insights, you know. And with the Tibetans, I definitely found them.
And then you found the Dalai Lama.
And found the Dalai Lama.
And you found Maharaji. So how did you find Maharaji, who said to you, go get a job?
I wasn't smart enough to realize that I was going to go see someone who was
But
going
what
to
I
change my
really
life.
love is when he
so
said,
great.
you Dr. American.
So I got there, and after ignoring me for, 10 days, enough time for me to think that I should leave, and until he, totally blew my mind, he called me over one day and he said, how much money do you have? And that's when I started getting a little bit, paranoid. I said, $500. He said, well, I don't mean here. He said, how much money do you have in the United States? I said, I think I've got about $500 there. He says, you're not telling me the truth. You've only got $500 here and $500 there. I said, yeah. He said, $500 here, $500, you are no doctor, which is what my mother told me. If you don't have any money, you're not a real doctor. So then he started chanting, you are no doctor, you are no doctor. And then he did this, Swami trick where he pretended to, read the future, and he looked down at me and he says, you are no doctor, UNO doctor, United Nations Organization, which is what they call it in India.
Right.
You're going to be a UN doctor, you're going to go to villages, you're going to give vaccinations, because smallpox is going to be eradicated, you're going to help, because this is God's gift to humanity.
Oh, that's great.
Now, wait, it's great, but I had never seen a case of smallpox. I'd sort of read about it in medical school, and that began my my pilgrimage from the monastery in the Himalayas down to the WHO office in New Delhi. And it made a lot of sense to Maharishi. It did not make a lot of sense to the UN when I walked in wearing, you know, a red robe and long hair and a big beard, and I said, I'm here to work for you. They didn't quite know how to.
And didn't it take 10 trips?
17.
17 trips between the ashram and Delhi. But how did you happen to become a monk with the Dalai Lama?
Well, that was because I was bent on being a monk, because I didn't have the UN to go to, and I wasn't no doctor either.
So?
But I wanted to study the Dharma forever, you know, because that was the greatest thing I thought that ever happened. And I still do think that. And so the Tibetans think when you want to study for life, what you do is you become a monk. That's the easiest way. It's like getting a MacArthur grant for life, you know. They bring you free lunch forever, you know. And so my old Mongolian guy told me not to be a monk because he said I wouldn't be able to stay that way. And Tibet was shattered already, you know. Tibetans only had refugee camps. And, you know, other than the really religious Tibetans, the other Tibetans were wondering, like, how much money do you have? I had $0. And they said, oh, you ain't no American. Do you know what I mean? So then eventually I realized I had to come back and be a professor or something rather than a monk.
But
you know.
first, how come the Dalai Lama ordained you? And
Well, he
hadn't
was
anyone
still
else?
really culturally sort of still in Tibet, and he was preserving the Tibetan monastic tradition, and he was ordaining a lot of Tibetans. And to them, you know, being a monk is the greatest thing you can do with your life. And so it's just a very natural, easy thing. It isn't really difficult, and he wasn't really attuned to the West, as my old Geshe was, who said, you're not going to stay a monk, don't be a monk. Live like a monk as long as you like, but don't formally do it because you'll regret it later. And I didn't listen being young, and the Dalai Lama was also young, and he and I were pals, and we used to talk about Freud and, you know, Einstein and what have you all the time, rather than the Buddhism. I would ask him about Buddhism, and he would say, later, 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 and then he would start talking about Western things. And so he thought if by me being a monk, I'd just stay with them forever type of thing, you know, and I thought so too. But then that didn't turn out to be possible, and I had to go here, and then that, the other, and then I realized, no, I can't be a Tibetan monk, you know.
Yeah.
You know, later, Uma looked at a picture of me when I was, years later, when I was dressed in my red robe with my shaved head, and she said, and I used to wear an eye patch in those days, and she said, oh, look, Daddy looks like Henry Miller in drag.